of the arena that he committed to fund. And so we're now back on funding the 52% of the arena that we always thought we were going to fund. And so that's a really good thing. That's been on my to-do list for quite some time. And so having that accomplished, Great Southern Bank is a great partner. I think that partnership raises the profile of the university to have a company that's headquartered in Springfield with their name on the arena, and they're operating, I think, now in 22 states, and they feel really good about it. We feel really good about it. And so that was one of my top three. And then we had the best year ever in capital appropriations. $50 million for science building renovation through Senator Blunt on the federal side, $30 million through Governor Parson. He signed the budget last week, last day of June. And so we have $80 million to expand and renovate what we now call Temple Hall. That project is under design. Matt Morris is leading that team and his department. And so we hope to break ground at graduation in December, right after the second commencement ceremony, and look forward to that project beginning. And then finally, you all know that when the name change occurred, we were limited in our ability to offer doctoral programs. Several years ago, we got a change to expand that. This year, we kind of completed all of that work when the coordinating board voted to have routine review for our professional doctorates. And that means instead of taking up to 2 years to get a doctorate approved at the state level, now this last one took us about 45 days. And so this year we've gotten occupational therapy and a doctorate of psychology approved. They're at HLC now. We expect to begin those programs fall of 23. The more important process, or the more important accomplishment is that will be now the routine way that our doctoral programs are reviewed at the state level. We've graduated over 1,100 people that have a doctorate from Missouri State University, and those programs have been very successful. And Zora Mulligan was the Commissioner of Higher Education when that change came about. She is here today as Zora stands. Zora is our new Executive Vice President. Great career in higher education, both serving 2 different stints, leading the coordinating board, also the executive director of the Community College Association, and chief staff at the University of Missouri for several years. And so we are very fortunate to have her here. This is her second day of work, and she is off and running. Brad Bodenhausen is with us today. Brad takes over from Jim Becker, Vice President for Community and Global Partnerships. And we had a meeting on July 1st, about 11 o'clock. I said, everything good? He's like, yep, we're 4 hours in, so far so good. And we are. And Brad and Zora are working together on expanding our employer partnerships and our work in the community. And so that's off to a great start. John Jasinski, the retiring president of Northwest Missouri State University, will join us a week from Monday as our interim provost for this year. And then since we gathered last time, our chief diversity officer, Wes Pratt, has announced his retirement. So we're working on an internal search to have that position filled here by the end of July. So while it's always sad for people that have had great careers at the university to roll off to retirement or to that next thing, I'm really excited about the team of folks that we have coming in to build on the good work that the folks did before they took those positions. With that, I do want to say a word about David Hall. And I don't know how we would have gotten through the last 2.5 years without David. I know he's going to talk about this. Not only did he lead our response at Missouri State University to the pandemic, he became a go-to player for many of the other institutions of higher education in the state, for many in state government, for many in important positions in Springfield. kind of as we got into this, the question at every meeting of multiple people from around the state was, David, what do you think? And he always had the right answer. And so I'm excited to hear this conversation. Now, if I sneak out just a little bit early, it's not because I don't want to hear David talk. It's I've got a plane to Florida at 2:37. So anyway, have a great conversation. I'll turn it over to Brett.
David, come on up. As you know, for those that are new to this, and then those online, we have done Bears in the Know series over the previous several years, and we switched it this year to Lunch with a Genius. David, you are a genius. Now you got to turn the microphone on and see how genius you are. Yeah, you are. Have a seat. Have a seat. And so it's really while we're talking about programs, it's really to learn about the person and what makes them tick and how they got here and that type of thing. So David, I know you're nervous and because we didn't practice any of this, which is sort of fun. And of course, I've worked with David over the years for many, many things. We like to tease David, but David, for those that don't know, is director of University Safety, reports to Vice President Matt Morris back there. So Matt is taking notes. And so if you have a meeting right after this, depending on what you say, but David is a graduate of Missouri State. He was the fire chief for the city of Springfield for several years, number of awards and honors for your work in public safety. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But first of all, let's go to the first. We have a picture we're going to show you. Put on the screen. If we can, Angie, if you can put that first picture. This is, yeah, this is good. But while she's doing that, there, isn't he cute? Yeah, that's you, right?
That was the first award I ever won. That was actually, my mom entered me into a baby photo contest.
Oh, wasn't that cute though? But so you won. You won?
I did.
And where was this?
This was up in Illinois, where I was born and raised.
But tell us about your stories, how you got here from
Yeah,
the very beginning.
Yeah, I will. So my parents are both from Arkansas, and back in the 50s, I moved up to Northern Illinois in order to find employment. And my mom went to school there and happened to run into my dad. They got married. I was the third child, and I've got an older brother, older sister, and one younger child as well. Grew up in a small town of 300, and we were there. My dad always wanted to get back to Arkansas, and we had an uncle who lived in Mountain Grove. So Mom finally relented and said, we'll move to Mountain Grove. So that's where I went to start high school, is in Mountain Grove. So I'm a Panther, and was there until I joined the fire department, moved up here to Springfield, went to Rogersville, and then ultimately here to Springfield.
I think we have another picture of the family. He puts that on the board. So when you were a kid, and I know that's a beautiful one, but let's go. Okay, so who are these people here?
Yeah, so this is your classic 1960s picture. So that's my mom holding my youngest brother, Steve, who's in Kansas City. And then the oldest one is my brother, Ron, who's in Dallas, and my sister, Linda, who's in Dallas. And then that's me holding the patriotic flag. I have no idea. It's probably on our way to church on the 4th of July, frankly, on Memorial Day. But that's my standard haircut right there. It's mom cut it, so it's always crooked.
Looks pretty good. I won't comment about hair. A bunch of it. So when you were a kid, did you always want to be a firefighter? Did you play fire trucks and wear the little hat and stuff like that?
That's funny. I didn't submit the picture. I had one of where I was playing with a fire truck whenever I was a little bitty. Actually, my passion was always not to be a firefighter. It was to be a truck driver, an over-the-road truck driver. I collected all the magazines and ordered the samples out of the magazines and took pictures of them at the truck stops anytime that mom and dad would stop there in Arkansas. So that's what I wanted to be, was a truck driver.
So, but in high school, what did you enjoy studying the most?
Yeah, so I was a VOAG person, and I grew up in a small town which grew lots of corn and soybeans, worked at my aunt and uncle's farm with the all summer long doing hay and that kind of thing. So when I came to Mountain Grove, when I got involved in VOAG, was actually set to, I hope I can say this, was going to go to the University of Arkansas and become a VOAG teacher. But life changes. I got married in high school as a senior and ended up, got a job offers just before I was set to go to the university, was already looking for housing and got a job offer and made that infamous statement is, I can always go back to school. Many people do not. I was fortunate I did. It took me 10 years. So I was 27 when I started my college education.
Oh, that's good. And you were studying what?
Whenever I went, I was a business major. So I got my undergraduate in business administration or business management, and then it was a comprehensive major. And then I came back and went through a master's in business administration. I started with the fire department when I was 27 and fortunately, because of the days off, you work one day, you're off two. So I was not used to having paid vacation days ever. So whenever I had all of that, it gave me a chance. So I enrolled for school and took all of my vacation time and went to school in 4 years and got my undergraduate while I was working full-time and a part-time job.
So, and we have a picture of you probably earlier on, not that one. We've seen that one. I know we love that one. But we got pictures for everybody as you leave, so we can take them. There you go.
Yes.
So this was what year do you think this was?
This was probably, at that point, that was probably in about 99. And I was already promoted to an officer at that point. Had the mustache and only shaved off once in my life. And that was to do a job interview for the fire department because I wasn't sure if it would impact me. And my kids had never, and then they hadn't seen me without it until just recently.
Wow. But you were studying business. So what do you want to do?
Oh, yeah. So great question. So whenever I was at Mountain Grove, went to work for a grocery store and started as a carryout and got my job offer. Instead of going to the University of Arkansas, I took this job offer as a photographer. So I went to work as a professional photographer. I did that with the intent of buying the business. That was kind of the agreement we had. And after a year, I got laid off. So he said as well, it's not going to work out. So it was a great experience for me, but I went back to the grocery store that day and they said, well, we actually had a manager's position come to work for us as a manager. So I did all the way up and started my own photography business and all of that stuff. So when I got up here and went to school, I debated do I get a master's in public administration versus business administration? My plans were always to retire from the fire department, go back to the grocery business. And so that's why I got an MBA, but then I took classes from the MPA program as well as my electives.
So again, I'm trying to get at, why a firefighter? Why did you want to do that?
So there's a story behind that.
I'm sure there is.
I like talking. So whenever I was in high school, or got out of high school, I was 21 years old, and our closest family friends we got together with all the time, their house was on fire. And I was at the grocery store and we were getting ready to close. And so I went out there. They were on vacation, but I watched their house. They lived just outside of town. I watched their house burn to the ground and I felt helpless. And so it's one of those things I said is, I don't want to feel like that again. So I went down that next week, joined the fire department as a volunteer, and started doing that. Did that for several years at Mountain Grove. And they had a retired chief out of Chicago that told me one time, he talked about people saying things that change your life. He says, you got a talent for this. You ought to consider doing it for a career. Never considered it ever in my life. Never considered that. And he was very progressive. And the fact is, in the 60s, city of Elgin, Illinois, they started making requirements for higher education. And that was the other thing he told me is he said, you need to get a college degree whenever you get a chance. And so because of that, I didn't know there was 500 applicants a year for the fire department. They'd hire 6 people. So I moved up here thinking I'll just apply and get on. I was naive. And fortunately, I did get hired the first year. And so that's why I immediately started college right after that, all because this one individual said, you should consider doing that for a living.
Were you a first gen student?
I was a first gen. So, yeah, it was neither my mom was valedictorian of her high school, large high school. She's extremely smart. My dad is extremely good from practical matters. So he loves figuring things out like that. He's since passed away, but he would have also been one really good at school. So I had that natural. I was a B student in high school.
Bragger.
Yeah, I wasn't that. Yeah, I just I got some A's. Yeah, I got some C's, but I was okay. But whenever I got to college, I was there. It was like a job to me. So I might miss one class this semester, and I always talk to the professor at the end of the year. Says, "Hey, I'm a firefighter. If I can't get off work, I can't come. But otherwise, I never miss class more than one day a whole semester."
So you never got in trouble in high school?
I didn't say that. Actually, I didn't. I was actually. My mom always talks about this. She says you were such a good kid. You were. I was. Now it wasn't that I wasn't mischievous. I was, but I didn't do bad things to get me in bad trouble.
Do you play with fire?
Yes.
You did.
I did.
So how's that?
Well, I got some pictures. I used to, again, I wanted to be a truck driver. So I took and I made me and my best friend that lived behind me, again, in this town of 300, I built models of like model trucks, model semis, tons and tons and tons of model semis. And then we made a diorama and we laid it out there and we poured the wax on it and then we poured the gasoline on it and we set it on fire and took pictures. So I still have those.
Speechless now. So, okay. So when you were in high school, you really didn't think much about college then?
No, I really didn't. So no, I was one as I planned, I worked for my dad in construction. And so it was to me as with work, and I worked at a gas station for a while until I got married. Then I needed a job that paid $2.10 an hour instead of $1 an hour. But yeah, so I was always just working.
So you started in the fire department. What fire station were you located at?
Station 1, right over here by the Shrine Mosque, the original old Station 1, and spent most of my career when I wasn't at headquarters down at old Station 1. And every time I would get promoted, I'd tend to get shifted out somewhere else, and I'd always put in for a transfer to come back as soon as I could. So spent most of my career there.
So when you started in Springfield Fire Department, did you say, I want to be fire chief?
In my mind, I always knew I wanted to promote. And I had some I was on Logan Rogersville Fire Department as a volunteer before I got on Springfield. In that year from when I packed up and moved from Mountain Grove until I got actually started. It's a long hiring process, takes about 9 months. So during that time I was out there, but I had guys on the department that said, you better treat him well because he'll be your boss one day. And I still remember that. And this was kind of some of those cranky ones who were old school, who didn't like higher ed, didn't like, the new generation type thing. And so I think there was a recognition early on that, it was one of those things I probably had some gifts for. My whole reason I like promoting was probably my favorite position was a company officer, that frontline supervisor, because it's about having an impact, working in a small group. I love the small group dynamics, but you have greater influence the higher you go. So that's what I was always, so every position I was at, I tended to love what I was doing, but then you could see but if I moved up, now I would have influence over half the city. And now if I moved up, I'd have influence over the whole city. And now so that was kind of my path, but it wasn't one of those things I need to be fire chief. It was, I want to be, but certainly I don't think it surprised most people.
And what year did you become fire chief?
In 2009.
2009. How'd that happen? Was there a retirement or how did that happen?
Yeah, so that was during the recession, and we'd had fire chiefs tend to have fairly short histories, so on average, typically about 4 years, about like a higher ed president. And so you see quite a bit of turnover with that. And part of that is generally is you start and you become chief, at least at that time, whatever department you started with, you'd be the chief of that. There wasn't this, oh, we're going to just hire people from all over. And so we'd only had one outside chief ever, and he was there whenever I was, and again, this is a history since 1896, and we'd only had one fire chief ever that was not from within the department. We'd had one of them that had retired, had Barry Rowlett come in as the fire chief. I was his assistant. He was really good about letting me really run operations, and I learned a lot because of that. And then he retired with the recession. There was a lot of controversial pension, and so people started jumping out, and so probably moved me up a couple of years before I normally would have.
But you've always been involved in communities wherever you go. Even at Missouri State, you were involved. I think we have another picture. Andy, show that. This is a picture of when you were, look at, there's Dr. Kaiser,
Yep.
Former president, university. What were you doing there?
Well, so at that time, I was asked, this was my undergraduate program, and I'd had a faculty member who recommended that I be considered to give the senior class speech at the senior banquet. And so it was written up and I submitted that, and there was two of us. And so that's what I was doing there. And it was obviously in Hammond Student Center, there was probably 600 people there, the largest group I'd ever spoken with. And I was young. I can see that.
I was there.
Were you?
Yeah.
And so what'd you think about it? What's your favorite part of my speech?
The very end. I like the end part. But that's when we used to do senior banquets at Hammond Student Center, all the graduating seniors, and that's quite an honor.
Yeah, and my focus was really about the change of the university. Just in the 4 years I've been there, we had made a lot of changes where you saw brick stadium, and I mean, it was just, and so that was kind of the things I talked about, is the amount of change that was going on and where we're moving to.
So when you were, during that time, and you're talking, did you ever think you would be working at Missouri State? Did that ever even cross your mind?
No, not at all. Absolutely zero thought about that ever.
So how did you get here?
So actually, I talked about Matt Morris. I had 28 years on the department, so I was enjoying my time as fire chief. And certainly as the leader, it's a stressful position. It's a tiring and a thankless position in many ways. Yes, all the time. Very much enjoyed it. Plan to work for till 30 years. And frankly, I could have worked beyond that. I maxed out my retirement at 25 years. So everybody says, man, why don't you leave? Why don't you leave? Why don't you leave? But I loved what I was doing. So I'm not going to leave something I enjoy doing. But they posted a new position here for emergency preparedness manager. And I knew Matt, and I knew what kind of an individual he was. And so I was told at a exercise we were doing, a tabletop exercise, a joint between MSU, it was an active shooter one that was done between MSU and the city. And I was told about the position. So it made me think is this, I didn't want to move away from Springfield. So I could have gone fire chief in many, many other places. And I thought, why would I go somewhere else to be a fire chief? If I love being a fire chief, I'd just stay here where I'm at. But with this, it was something that was, I could stay here and yet also still have that contribution back, because I didn't want to move away from Springfield, frankly, because I like our community so much.
And you became a bear. And there's a picture. The next picture is you are a true bear.
I am a true bear. That's
in
right.
this one. There you go.
That's
There
right.
you David Hall.
Yeah.
Did you draw that yourself or did Matt?
I wish, I wish, whenever I retired from the city, one of the guys who worked in the PIO department does those, and so he did that as a gift to me at my retirement there at the city, so.
So when you became head of public safety here, you've done a lot of these exercises that you take all of us through, administrators and others go through. You've done active shooter, and you actually did a pandemic.
We did, prior to the pandemic. So, you know, I loved coming to the university because I used so many of the same skills that I used as fire chief. Yet at the same time, it was something new. I was learning something a little different and it could have, and so, which I enjoy learning stuff. So, one of the things that you do as part of the process, you do a threat hazard risk assessment. So you really identify what are all those risks, and everybody kind of weighs in on what they think are the greatest risks. Well, pandemic is one that's on there, and it got rated as not in the highest level, but in that upper medium level. But consequence wise, it was, you know, all the way over at the high end of that. And so one of the things we did was a mumps exercise, as if we'd had an outbreak of mumps, because we know pandemics do unfortunately happen. Then, you know, 6 months later, or not actually a year, almost not quite a year later, we end up with a pandemic. And so a lot of those lessons learned were very applicable to what we had done.
How close was it? The exercise to what happened?
Well, interestingly, one of the things is, there's no deans here other than Tom. So they were very clear as you could not move the university all online. They said you cannot, that there's just no way that can be done. And frankly, as at the time, we probably didn't think that we could do that. And I was new enough to be ignorant to know that, you know, I didn't realize that. But obviously we found out that we can do that. And you know, faculty really were able to step up, and it forced them to learn something. All of us, I mean, I had never heard of Zoom until the pandemic, and you know, I use it all the time.
Cliff was right. You became an expert pretty quick, and people around the state and the nation actually talked with you on the response, that type of things. But when that first occurred, when we heard about that, that would have been March. We were in St. Louis, the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, and we actually had Jimmy Edwards, who was head of public safety for the city of St. Louis or county of St. Louis, said he just came back from a press conference. Governor Parsons said they had their first COVID patient. And then we came back to campus, and then everything started going crazy. Did you think at the time I think we had the second COVID patient in the state of Missouri identified here, is that correct?
I don't remember, it was the first major outbreak whenever we had here in Greene County that really demonstrated how it would overwhelm our system.
So at that time, when you heard that, did you think, oh my gosh, this is going to be major? Or did you think this will be over, like I thought, in a couple of weeks?
So, yeah. So early on, actually, even back in January, before it really became big, I'm a member of the Terrorism Homeland Security Committee for International Association of Fire Chiefs. So I get lots of intelligence bulletins and information regularly. And that was one of the things, even there, we were starting to get is, hey, this could be a big deal. And so I didn't realize how big of a deal it could be, but certainly early on, I was seeing is this is concerning. It's gonna have an impact on us. I just wasn't sure how big.
What was the time when you thought this is a long-term deal, and we've really got to get serious about this? This is going to be a long-term.
It was probably whenever we started seeing cases up in the Northeast before it ever got to Missouri. I visited with Matt and said, Matt, this is going to be a big deal. We need to be preparing for. And so it was early on. everything starts running together, years start running together, unfortunately now, but yeah, that was really, it was really early on that we could see this was gonna be a big deal because it was not something that you could stop. And the initial strategy, obviously, and this was really even prior to the shutdown, is your strategy is you shut down in order to isolate and get rid of it. That's like what we did. I'm trying to think of the one that came into Dallas from Africa that we had. Ebola, thank you. Where that we had that, we had a few cases, and that was really what you're hoping for. But as soon as we saw what we call getting out of the wild, we knew that it was going to, we were going to be impacted, just no matter when.
So for those that weren't involved in the plan, tell us how the plan went during that whole
time.
couple of years.
Yeah, so it was a fascinating process. I do want to make one thing clear. Cliff said I led the efforts on it. I really didn't. I was a central point to make sure decisions got made and information got passed on. It was really, there was a steering team. We met all the time. Several are in this room. And we'd bring issues up and we talk through things, and then decisions would get made. And then we met with the bigger group, which included others. And that kind of next step down. And my job was to make sure they got carried out. And so that's why a lot of people put the face of it really on me. But the reality is I was working closely with leadership in order to be able to get decisions made and then actually see if they got it.
Yeah, you're being a little modest though, but you became an expert though in this.
Boy, I'll tell you, I didn't know the difference between quarantine and isolation, but I do now. So I'm very thankful. They always say, I've heard Cliff say it before, is if you hire good people, that's got to be your skill. If nothing else, hire good people. I fortunately hired Karen McKinnis from the health department just before the pandemic. She was an epidemiologist, and she took my old position of emergency planning. So I had somebody who was truly an expert in this, who then taught me all the things that I needed to know. And of course, I'm a avid reader on that kind of stuff. So that's really where we got it. And an expert is always two things. One is knowing something about your topic, and number two is being willing to tell other people about it. And so that's what we did. A lot of institutions what I found is they're afraid to share. And so just by simply attending these meetings and also I had the connection to the community. So we started meeting with the health department and the other higher ed leadership in order to kind of say, it's okay, so what are you guys doing? Here's what we're hearing. And so that we had somewhat of a coordinated, consistent response. Each individual did their own thing, but each individual institution did their own thing. But we all knew what each other were doing, and we had good sound reasoning we could bounce ideas off of. So, I think that was really the skill I brought. One of the things I learned from this. So firefighting, everybody's talking about this. Oh man, this is moving so fast. Things are changing constantly. And to me, it was terribly slow and changing. So being used to firefighting, you have an emergency and, 2 hours later, you're back in the fire station. So a pandemic where the things changed, every few days or every week was really slow moving to me. And so that's one thing I really learned from President Smart was don't make a decision until you have to make it. But when you have to make a decision, make a decision. So because I was ready to make decisions, and Brian and Matt can attest, I'm ready to make a decision about what we're going to do in the fall come April. And they're like, well, we don't need to make that decision yet. Let's slow down. And, I want to get the decision made and get it implemented and get moving and get it done and go to the next thing we need to do. So that was something I really learned from the pandemic.
So what happened here with the response, though, it did spread to other organizations in Missouri and out of the state. But you got calls from other organizations. What was that? I mean, what caused all that?
So the Department of Higher Ed, I will tell you, they've got a great staff up there. Mara Woody was really instrumental in that. She set up what they called office hours, and just a Zoom meeting every week, and they would bring in some of the state experts and be able to give us the latest information. So we got really good briefings. So, a lot of people complain about going to meetings. I don't generally complain about going to meetings. And the reason is meetings are where you learn information, number one, and number two, is where decisions get made. So, again, I like having influence, so I don't like meetings for that very reason. So always attend the meetings. Not everybody does that. So that's where then we started sharing ideas. So that's where the word started getting out. So then I started getting calls from other institutions. Like I say, we met every week for 2 years. So it was really good.
So I know you can't predict the future, but the next disaster, if you will, what's more likely do you think could happen on the campus?
My retirement. That's everything we do is about probabilities. You look at probability risk. That's what you look at. So reality is, pandemic is not something that's going to happen very often, although it will probably happen more frequently. It will, happen in my career again. But we don't know. It may be 5 years from now. It may be 10 years. It may be 100 years. But we know, we look at risk, and so we know there's tornadoes are a factor. We certainly know that shooters are a possibility. We just know is that there's. I think about things like our most recent tabletop was on a power outage. Because you think about the impact to campus and our ability to do things as if you have a significant power outage that is during the hottest time of the year or the coldest time of the year, and then how it is you mitigate that. So, pandemic was kind of really one of those that was really challenging, and yet also is kind of that, that it can happen, but the probability is just so low you don't really expect it to happen.
So of all the disasters, and I put the pandemic in a disaster category, of all the ones you've experienced, both as a firefighter and working here, what would you say the one is the most caused you from most concern? Or fires?
Yeah. You get, as responding to fires, it just gets to be so routine. Most people, it's, and obviously there's tragedies with that, whenever you have loss of life and loss of businesses and loss of, income, that kind of thing. But the reality of it is fires fascinating. The fact of it's about physics and thermodynamics, and, you become an expert student in that, and about command and control and applying resources, things like that. So fires become what we call run of the mill for the most part. Now, every now and then you have some of those really major ones. Probably the most challenging thing, obviously pandemics at the top of that list, but tornadoes, because they hit multiple locations, and although the ice storm, I might throw that in there. That was certainly, the fire chief was out of town. I was the assistant chief, so I was over all of the response for the city's fire. Because he couldn't even get back, he was out of state. So spent 3 days, here without, constantly in the emergency operations center directing all of that. So that was really challenging from that standpoint. But
tornadoes? You've been in tornadoes?
Yep, I have. I grew up in Northern Illinois. I used to watch them coming across the plains. So it was, tornadoes are fascinating, but they're extremely dangerous.
Now, this is probably a bad question, but did you sort of like did you like tornadoes? Did you like a good fire?
I did. I love it.
There's a bad question.
So I would say is, I never want a bad experience to happen to anyone, but if it's going to, I want to be there. So that was kind of and again, it's that, two things. One is what you often find with firefighters, they tend to be adrenaline junkies. So you do things like scuba diving, and you do, high risk type stuff. Never did skydiving, although, when I was younger, I probably would have. But you do those types of things. It's very exciting. It gets your heart up. It's physically demanding. It's emotionally draining. And frankly, it can be scary at times, but most of the time is you just felt is pretty confident. It's like somebody who's really good at driving a race car.
Okay, well, hope for the best. Now we're gonna go into what we call the lightning round, although that's a bad word. But I'll use it. So whatever comes to your mind the quickest, so we really get to know you. Yeah, you should work. Favorite food?
Mexican.
Very good. Favorite restaurant then? Let's see if you hit this one right.
Well, I was gonna say the Roost, but it's not Mexican.
It's not Mexican Villa.
It's not.
Okay.
Although I like the styles and used to be able to make it, had the recipe and made it at the station many times.
Are you a good cook?
I'm a good cook.
Okay.
I don't do it anymore, but I used to. I gotta have a lot of people, but because I make lots, so.
So what do firefighters eat? I mean, if you're gonna cook for that many, how many?
So I actually had it published in a national recipe I made in a national magazine, cookbook, firefighters cookbook, and Hall's Inferno sandwiches. So you fix lots of stuff and hot stuff. That's what you fix.
Sounds great.
It's good.
So favorite type of movie, comedy, drama, thriller, or disaster movie?
Comedy.
Really?
Yeah, I like that.
Not the disaster movie.
I like those two.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Favorite color?
Green.
Green. Why green?
Go. I don't
Okay.
know. It's
Okay.
grass. I don't know.
That would be red. But I didn't know. 4th of July or New Year's Eve?
4th of July.
Wow, you don't stay out for New Year's Eve?
I don't stay up for either one.
Okay.
But I stay up till 11 maybe.
Oh, there you go. Are you an early bird?
Oh, yeah. I got up 4 o'clock this morning, so I always get up by 5, but I typically get up at 4.
A lot of groans out there.
You're missing the best part of the day.
So it was just natural?
It is.
You
Ever
always
since I
have?
was a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, since I was a little kid, I got up early. I've never understood it.
Okay, pie or cake?
Pie, cherry.
Oh, good. Favorite sport?
Well, I like professional sport. I like sports. I like football. So that's probably my favorite sport. I used to play basketball. I played football 1 year. Guess what position?
You weren't quarterback, were you?
Oh, no, much better. I was a
Safety?
defensive lineman. So the coach said, I don't think like me and want to get me off the team.
Maybe not, maybe not. Do you like to read a good book or watch a good movie?
I love reading books, but I read like management books, things like that. I don't read, I love history. So I like watching historical movies, things like that, but I don't read any fiction.
Okay. To relax, I like to blank.
Smoke a cigar.
You're playing with fire.
I know, it is. Can't believe it or not, when I was young, I used to smoke cigars. So, yeah, and I used to chew. I was from Mountain Grove, come on. So, I was a different guy. Most people would not recognize what I was in high school versus now. So I
We
was,
saw the pictures.
yeah, well, you didn't see the one with my perm, or the longer hair.
That's right. We did not show that.
Really done in the limits and,
Yeah. Best vacation spot?
Sanibel Island in Florida.
Good. So you're a beach guy.
We go there every fall. Well, we were up until the pandemic, and just my wife and I, because it was relaxing. You could look at shells. And it was just beautiful weather down there.
And then one last question before we get the questions out here. Do you listen to the police fire scanner still?
I do not. I would love to, but they have the 800 trunk radio, but it's just, I can't do two things at once. So if I've got the scanner on, I'm listening to it. If I've got the TV on, I'm watching it. So instead if I'm gonna get something done, I gotta have it turned off.
Do you go to the fire department around here much?
I do some, not as much, although I try to get by, and I run into them all the time and visit with the crews and stuff, which is fun.
Yeah. Good. Questions? Yes.
2, 1, do you think Metro Springfield's prepared for a shooter? What's your comments about that?
You can never be prepared for
Well, I
a
don't think
shooter.
exactly true.
But here's what I would say is we have really good resources. So I think things that you see occur where that they tend to not do well, I think for the most part, Springfield does well. So one is Springfield Police Department. It is an extremely professional organization that is really good at what they do. So I have great respect for them on work relationship. They work really well with others. So for example, where you see things falling down is where the organizations don't work together well. But they're really good. Most people don't realize if you're not been outside of Springfield, you don't realize how well we get along with each other and have good relationships across the board in different ways. And so certainly that's what we see is Springfield Police Department. They've got, so, you know, what happens is command fails in these type of events. Virtually every single report that comes out on active shooter on the after action is there was a failure of command to coordinate between the different, whether it's police and fire, police and the EMS. That's exactly right. And that just happens to be one. The Pulse nightclub was another one, but almost everyone. They really train on that, and I don't think we will have as much issue as somebody else will.
The other one is, what do you see happening with this monkeypox business? I'm not afraid of it or anything, but what do you see about that?
Yeah, you know, I think I blocked it out of my brain, frankly, after COVID. But here's my thought is, I saw this during COVID. You see it during everything. Is the media sensationalizes stuff? So I think it's hard to get to the real facts of stuff. I'm not saying that that's not the case with it. What I'm saying is, I think we're hypersensitive to any type of infectious disease right now. That makes us extra concerned over something that before it would have been, yes, that's important for us to be paying attention to, but is it a reason to get overly excited? I'm not there yet. I'm not seeing the information coming in that I was seeing before with COVID.
From what I read, it doesn't seem real easy to get.
Correct. Which is always, that's
Whereas
the big
with,
deal.
COVID, I think it is.
That's right.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Mike.
So it's one thing for you all to be prepared, but you need to have people willing to respond. How do students do, faculty?
That's an area we got to work on. You know, I'll be candid. It's with a transient population where you have a new student coming in every single, year, and then they're gone in 4 years, and then you got new students in. It is a perpetual issue that all universities struggle with. I think that what you are seeing is, and I'm going to speak because most people automatically tend to think of active shooter and whenever they're concerned. You're seeing more of that in K-12 education as far as where they're getting the training on run, hide, fight, and what to do. Much like students who live around here know what to do in the event of a tornado. Everybody knows what to do in the event of a fire. They've been drilled that since they were started first grade. So I think that they're bringing that stuff in, that knowledge that maybe they've not necessarily had in the past and needed. But I think that's always a challenge. I think faculty and staff are the other ones. It's a process. Before you can have good training, you gotta have good plans. And that's what we really are working on through those good plans. I'm talking way too much. Having good emergency plans is just key because we've got good emergency action plans. In the fire, what do? You got 6 things you need to call 911. You need to, get outside, go to your assembly point, that kind of thing. Those are the easy ones. But now if I'm specifically talking about is for you as this faculty member in this location, or you as a staff member, what do you need to do? That's a very different conversation, which we're working through those emergency plans. We've got some across the university, but as far as really refining those, and that's the area where that's the reason that they created this position, frankly.
Cindy.
David, you said you wanted to be an over-the-road driver when you were young. So I have a burning question. Did you get a stint of driving trucks to the fire?
I did, and I love driving the fire engine. It was, and we even still had some standards when I came on, so I actually got to use, I had to actually somewhere hold up, you had to double clutch. So, and they were unsynchronized transmissions. So yes, I did. So
It's a good question. You like to turn on the sirens and the lights? Is that fun?
it is. Running emergencies is fun.
This is a real important deep question. Are you familiar with Chicago Fire and Chicago Med?
I do. I get questions. I don't
love
watch.
Chicago Fire.
I will tell you is, what's funny is you think about backdraft, for those of you who go back a few years, probably one of the best things that ever happened for the fire service to build up an image that wasn't true. So, and then you had a lot of.
My question is that true to life for the firehouse?
And that's what I was gonna say, is your first, the Towering Inferno and Backdraft and Ladder 49, they caught some essences of that, but they were so Hollywood that it wasn't. So what you find with Chicago Fire, it's much more realistic about the actual dynamics of what goes on in a firehouse, which is not always very good. But it's somewhat, it's not as over the top as that, so it's still embellished, but it probably captures that camaraderie. I mean, we are like a really, really close knit team. We spend our days together. I spent more time with, we call it our fire department family, than I did with my regular family, because you're there 24 hours a day. So you were there 7 in the morning until 10 at night, maybe during the night. And the next day, your spouse has gone to their work during the day, your kids are gone to school, so you'd have a few hours both evenings, but that was really it. So you actually spent more time with your fire department family. So you got to be really close and stuff like that.
So that's transcended into the university. I mean, you tend to work a lot.
I do. I love work. I like being busy, and I really do enjoy it.
If we could just get you a car with sirens and lights, would you like to drive around campus? Out?
I would.
I'd like that.
Matt, so tell Matt that.
You got on your budget, Matt. Little siren, little instead of red light, maroon light. Yes.
I'll just take a golf cart with one.
I figured you would. Okay. Any other questions? And those that are online, you can type in your question there. Yes.
If COVID cases were to arise again to concerning levels, what are the steps that the university is prepared to take, like fully online again, like to that extent, or just social distancing again in classrooms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, obviously, many people say this as well, COVID, that's behind us. We're moved on. But the reality is we're still monitoring that. So that's something Dr. Maggie from the health department, as well as myself and others, we constantly are looking at kind of thing. So the CDC is, the number of cases is less relevant now than what it was initially. So one is we know there's way underreporting because you end up using home tests instead. But the other thing is what we're really looking at is the problem with the pandemic is it overwhelms your resources. So you can't get enough nurses, you can't get enough hospital beds, you can't get enough of the treatment. So that's what causes the problem with the pandemic. And so otherwise it becomes kind of like any other disease, so to speak. So that's really what we're looking at. And so that's what we monitor is what's the hospitalization rates, what's our resource capability. And then we get evaluated by the CDC, evaluates counties on that. And so that's what we still monitor. Now, specifically towards the question, what actions are, would we be prepared to take? What I would say is you would continue to see us looking at those from a policy level decision and saying, what is the specific situation? What are the things that we need to do? I think what you found, at least I feel a lot of pride in the way the universities handled this, because I think we were as successful as you potentially could be, because you're always going to make some mistakes. But it's about looking at those and making those decisions at the time based on what are the actual conditions and what makes sense to do at that time. So, that's probably the best I could say on that.
Dr. Mallard.
Chief, most of us would believe that the real beginning of education, for example, should be a family matter. The family is responsible for the education of the child, and then others take over. Who's helping families? The pandemic is a family issue. It's very personal. Who's helping families learn their place in pandemic issues?
Well, boy, now there's a question, because that really goes to the heart of society. And today, frankly, it's much broader than that. As we look at really all of our issues, many of you may know, I co-chair the Springfield Public Schools Task Force on Facilities. went through that the first time and now coming into that to the second time. And it really tests your skills because you have such diversity of thought and such, the level of civility is so different now than then. And it really gets to some of the core of your question is, what is the role of families and what is the role of that in education, the impact of education? So I don't know that I've probably got a good answer for that, or certainly not the most
So the
qualified.
university say, because, and you all did such a great job during this pandemic. You just kept on going without a lot of difficulty, with much difficulty, but with a lot of success. Should the university, based upon the fact that you know so much, take on a family, a little something for families in the university area?
Yeah, so again, I hope I'm getting to the heart of your question. Certainly what we've seen through the pandemic is one is the impact on mental health and how that impacts families. And I think that's something that we all see. I think it was something that predated pandemic, frankly. We've been seeing that trend. And I think that's one thing. There's more emphasis on that by the university as well as the community and others as a society as a whole. I think there's better recognition of that. As far as what we also saw during the pandemic, and again, this may kind of relate to that question, is we certainly saw a politicization of it and some real questioning of our core institutions that we have, such as education, such as government, such as the bureaucracy, which I think bureaucracy is not a dirty word. It's got specific reasons for it, but like CDC and others. And I think that's some of the toll that it was amplified by the pandemic. I don't know that the pandemic caused any of it, but I think it amplified it and made it much more clear. But I think some of those issues related to the social foundations and families related to education, that is a much bigger and broader picture that's more challenging, frankly, and has been underway. My wife and I were talking about this just the other day for generations now, as we've seen this evolution towards the point where we're at today.
Well, I know we're out of time, but if you have other questions, come see him afterwards. But David, you are an expert in this area, and it's also a timing thing. I mean, I think you were brought here for reasons, and the time, unfortunately, was correct in terms of your arrival here and preparing the university for other potential disasters, other pandemics down the road. And so we appreciate you being an expert in your field, and thank you for being here. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for being here. We'll be back in September for another edition of Lunch with a Genius. So have a good afternoon.